In just 3 days, what will be a smaller group of Republican presidential hopefuls will meet in South Florida for the crucial third debate. With the Iowa caucuses just over 2 months away now, some of the big name hopefuls have already dropped out or missed the cut. We'll look at where the Republican race stands now, where it may be after Wednesday's showdown in Miami. Plus, look at the impact of the Republican frontrunner again sitting out this contest. Now, let's go on the record.
From WPBF 25, this is On the Record with Todd McDermott.
The third Republican presidential debate again happens in Miami this coming Wednesday night, November 8th. It may be the last chance for some candidates to make their case on the national stage before primary voting begins in January. With the Iowa caucuses, we begin this morning with our exclusive WPBF 25 News political analyst, former Florida House Majority Leader, Adam Hasner. Good morning, Adam. Thanks for being here.
Great.
Let's start with this idea that, again, it's a smaller group of candidates and it is more pressure. How do you expect perhaps just a handful of candidates on the stage to perform when there's that pressure that this might be their last chance?
Well, we've always known the field was going to winnow over time, and it has. There will be less candidates. But remember now, this shows how important Florida is in the national scheme of things for Republicans. The debate's being held in Miami. Governor Ron DeSantis, hometown crowd. I think what you're going to see is him being able to display that Florida message, right? He's talked about it a lot on the campaign trail. Maybe it hasn't been as successful in some states around the country, but it's going to be very successful here, and he's going to be able to talk about things that were accomplished in special session as well on top of that.
So usually in a debate, there is someone who becomes the target of the other people on stage. Because this is in Florida, because technically Ron DeSantis is still in that number 2 slot behind the former president, who again will not be there. Do they go after Governor DeSantis in this debate Wednesday night?
I think what's changed a lot since the last debate is that we went a lot from economics and we went a lot to the economy and President Biden to foreign policy. And I think what you're going to see on the stage is Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis going after each other a little bit, but also too, I would expect to see both of them going against Vivek Ramaswamy because of some of the positions that he's taken. And then I think, again, you'll see Haley and DeSantis going after Trump because they know they still have to make up a lot of ground before voting starts.
And does Ramaswamy, does he pose as kind of a surrogate for the former president as well, because some of his policy positions are very close to Donald Trump's?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have felt that, but it doesn't show up in the polling that way. He is out there as really somebody who's trying to inherit the MAGA crowd. But I think DeSantis really has a much stronger hold on that part of the party.
I want to take a look, if we could, at this higher bar that's been set by the Republican National Committee to qualify for this particular debate. You said a winnowing process. It's happening. This field is essentially cut in half. The threshold is 4% support in 2 national polls, or 4% support in 1 national poll and 2 early primary state polls. Stay with me here. If you have to show as well 70,000 unique campaign donors and a minimum of 200 unique donors in at least 20 states. Now, with all your years in politics, does this seem like a fair way to do this? Because I'm sure some candidates are very disappointed. They have not dropped out of the race, but they will not be there Wednesday night.
Yeah, I think you have to get to a point where it's realistic that you can win the nomination, and the polling and the donors are big indicators of that. The big difference here, though, is that the person who is polling in the lead is not going to be on the debate stage, and so I think it's important to not have as many candidates on the stage. Get it down to as few candidates as you possibly can, as you said, as you're heading into January, Iowa, February, into New Hampshire.
We have to talk about the other person who won't be there, and that would be the former Vice President Mike Pence. Just your take on what happened there. Now, there are a lot of different factors that influenced him, but to see a former vice president who many times would be a standard bearer for the party next go round actually have to drop out. What was your take on the end of this campaign for him?
Well, I think as you heard in the aftermath of him finally making that announcement, so many people applauded him for his career in Congress, as governor, as vice president. He was a standard bearer for the party. And yes, things have changed a lot in the Republican Party. And I think because of where the primary base voters are now, he could just never catch fire. He could never make up that ground. And it was just time for him to do what he did. And I think he did it in a very classy, statesman-like way. And I think Mike Pence definitely has a role in the future of this party. And I think he'll continue to be able to be a voice. But it was time for him to move on.
Let me ask you about the people who will be on the stage Wednesday night, and that is, can someone still break away from this pack? We now see that polling in Iowa shows Nikki Haley has in some ways caught Governor DeSantis in the polling. Is there a way, and if you would, what you think the way might be, for someone to break away Wednesday night? Is it possible?
I'm not sure it's possible because you have the Trump vote and then you have everybody else. The difference is that I think Haley has pulled more of the anti-Trump Republican Party primary voters than anybody else, which is why she's been able to consolidate a little bit more. So I really do think outside of Trump, this is really coming down to a DeSantis-Haley as an alternative to the former president.
So does this come down to more policy positions, or is it that X factor? Is it the connection with the candidate factor?
Yeah, I think that really does have a huge part of it, especially in those early states like Iowa and New Hampshire, where there's so much retail aspect to it. It's why Governor DeSantis is spending so much time in Iowa, so much time in New Hampshire, because you have to have those types of connections with voters in small settings, and going around the state, visiting all the counties, visiting all the local town halls. So there is that X factor beyond just the policy. They do definitely have policy differences, but I think that X factor makes up for a lot.
And we do have to talk about the fact the former president will not be there. That's 3 in a row. He shows no sign of wanting to debate any of these people. What kind of impact does that have overall? Does this blunt the effect of anything we see Wednesday night?
Well, I think we've seen it now in prior debates. Not only has he not participated on the stage, but he's had alternative programming. And I think we can expect to see that again during this debate, that he's going to be out there and trying to draw his own crowd, his own attention. I think ultimately what a lot of people are looking for is to see DeSantis and Haley and Trump on a stage with none of the other candidates who are currently in the race. And I think if Trump were to do that, I think maybe then you could see some type of breakout moment for one of the other competitors. But until then, Trump not being on the stage really changes the dynamics in a way that we've never seen before in presidential politics.
And we should add again, the former president will be holding a campaign rally in Hialeah that actually starts before the debate starts. Finally here, one more question, and that is, at what point do the remaining candidates decide that it's best for the party to get out of this race?
Well, I think it's happening, right? You saw it with Mike Pence, and I think you're going to see it with people who don't qualify for the Miami debate. And then after the Miami debate, I think people's money starts to dry up. You saw Tim Scott, who has obviously, gotten a lot of great attention, but now his super PAC is stopping to spend money. So at some point, the money dries up. And you can't go on any longer, and that's starting to happen now.
So maybe the campaign donors tell you when.
Yeah, money definitely makes a difference.
All right, Adam Hasner, our exclusive political analyst, thanks for being here this morning for On the Record. And coming up, we'll talk with our other exclusive WPBF 25 expert political analyst, former Congressman Ron Klein, about the upcoming debate and what happens after that. That's when On the Record returns.
Flavor on and on.
I'm in the driver's seat. We keep our options open. Our night's lit. Checkers flavor is on at $1.99. You choose Jack the Barbecue Burger, the sauced up A1 Swiss Burger, or Checkers Classic Bacon Cheddar Crisp. $1.99 each. Tonight, we're on. 3 choices, $1.99. Checkers.
There are a few places where you'll hear the truth. And this is one of them.
With HealthSun Health Plans, life is a piece of cake with access to exclusive providers that take care of all my medical needs and all under the same roof.
It's like a Medicare makeover. With HealthSun, every year you can receive $1,978 back in your Social Security check, $600 for OTC items, and much more. Take it from me. I'm Mr. Sunshine. Call us today to learn more about our benefits.
Here's what Floridians are saying about StormSmart custom hurricane protection.
We can't tell you how perfect the installation is. We were over the moon pleased.
The hurricane shades on our lanai are so functional and beautiful.
They block incoming rain and sun and allow me to see out.
The next hurricane season will find us very well prepared.
We will absolutely endorse StormSmart.
Call 866-60-SMART and start designing your custom StormSmart screens and high-impact windows today.
You're watching On the Record on WPBF 25.
Joining me now to go on the record, our former South Florida Congressman Ron Klein, our other exclusive WPBF 25 News political analyst. Ron, thanks for being here this morning. I want to start, if we could first, talking about former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. You predicted weeks ago, way back in that first primary debate, which was back in September, that she would be on the rise. And it looks like that's the case. What's happening with her candidacy here during the primary season?
Well, she did a good job of introducing herself for people who didn't know her at that first primary debate. And I think that she has presented well from that point of view. She probably presents better for middle of the road and maybe even some Democrats than she does for a Republican base, though. So she'll get to a certain level, and she's obviously giving DeSantis a run for his money at this point. But I think it's going to be a difficult race for her to even go much above where she is right now.
Well, let's talk about that, because with the Iowa caucuses, first in the nation in January for the Republicans, they're all important. The polling in Iowa right now shows Governor Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley basically tied as we're sitting here. The governor continues to trend in the wrong direction. What's happening with his candidacy as far as the base goes?
I think the base has never been convinced that he's a good alternative to Trump. He was sort of Trump in many ways, and then initially was unwilling to even challenge Trump. Now he's trying to challenge Trump. It's too late. And I think he hasn't really made a good case for people, although he's been very hard-edged, which I think has lost some voters as well in that process.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because he has sold his candidacy as the alternative to Trump, saying Trump can't win, I can. That has always been the message from the DeSantis campaign. Where do you think this went wrong? Was it not making contrast between himself and the former president sooner, or was this a lost cause to begin with?
I think it was a difficult challenge from the beginning. Trump has a lock on a big part of the Republican base, but I think it could have been done differently. There'll be a lot of postscripts written on what he did wrong. He had the money. He was trying to make the case that what he did in Florida, or did to Florida, the way I would say it, he was going to do that for the benefit of the rest of the country. But I think a lot of people felt like that really wasn't such a great thing, and it just didn't connect, and Trump just has that lock.
I have to bring up Mike Pence. I talked with Adam about it as well. I'm not sure that anybody handicapping this race thought that Mike Pence would be there necessarily at the end, but he's a former vice president, and he decided to drop out. I wanted to get your take, just from a political perspective, the timing of dropping out and what it means for other candidates who are still in the race as of today.
It's a good question. I serve with Mike Pence, so I know him fairly well. He's a pretty serious guy, as you can tell by the way he comes across. I think he saw his candidacy not going anywhere, and particularly with Iowa evangelicals, which would have been a good base for him to work with. No movement. Matter of fact, some lost movement. So I think he probably just pulled the plug when he figured it wasn't going anywhere. And what it means for the others, I think some are going to hang in there as long as they can financially afford to hang in there. Ultimately, more will drop out. If Haley is able to pick up some of those, some of the support from some of the people that were voting for the people who drop out, that's good for her. Again, I just don't see it amounting to enough of a challenge to Trump.
Not to make light of a primary debate, but I kind of look at this as a golf tournament. The cut has come, and we're down to just a handful of candidates on that stage. Obviously, the front runner is nowhere to be seen. He'll be in Hialeah Wednesday night with his own rally. But as these cuts come, you mentioned having enough money to stay in the race. Is it possible for some of these candidates who just want to get to Iowa, or maybe have a chance to get on the debate stage after the first of the year, if that's when it would be, to hang in there with so little support?
Well, normally, the money is all the key to staying in a race. It costs money to be in these states. Now, a lot of people will stay in as long as they can because they're vying for the vice president ticket on the ticket or some other position. With Trump, nobody knows what they're getting, and unless they've really been fully behind him from the beginning, Trump probably will not give him the time of day along the way. So I think it's very interesting. I think they'll stay in as long as they can. And at some point, they'll probably follow the same fate that Mike Pence did.
You know, we've talked about Chris Christie before because he's a Trump critic, former Trump ally. He's been in this race to a large extent to criticize Donald Trump. Does he hang in longer? And I know this is just a guess, but does he hang in longer because he's waiting for that chance?
I think he is going to hang in longer because he doesn't take probably as much money to stay in the race. And yes, he will not do extremely well in Iowa or New Hampshire for that matter, maybe a little better in New Hampshire, but he is playing a role in his mind of being this critic and laying it out there, which in the ultimate end will be something that in a general election, I'm sure will be used over and over again as criticisms of Donald Trump.
Now, as a former Democratic congressman, you said you did serve with Mike Pence. He's out. With who's left, do we see a potential vice presidential running mate at all for Donald Trump in this field?
I don't. Again, the concern I've heard from so many people I know in Washington, the Republican side, is that the concern they have of a second presidency is the kinds of people that he will put in cabinet positions and in key positions will be loyalist first. That's the number one thing. Competency, at least what I'm hearing, not so much, but loyalist first. So you have to look at each one of these people and say, does any of them have that credibility? The credentials that Trump's going to say, it's all in for me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, period, and nothing else matters.
All right, and now, again, going back to Mr. Trump, again, he hasn't signed any loyalty pledge that he would support another candidate as these people on the debate stage have. At the same time, he has pointed out he doesn't believe he needs to debate. Everybody knows his policy positions. Just as a politician, which you were, good strategy to stay above the fray and not debate these people?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's not what Americans have expected in the past, but Donald Trump has broken many of the rules of typical elections and things leading up to elections. So I don't think anybody's surprised by him doing this, and I think it's probably he's been able to keep the attention on him. Every one of these indictments has been an opportunity, the way he views it, to show how he's being persecuted and prosecuted, et cetera. So I think him staying out from his point of view, I don't think it's serving the country well, but I think from his point of view, it probably works.
And final question, what does the endorsement of former Governor, current Senator Rick Scott of Donald Trump, I don't think most Republican observers or observers of the GOP would be surprised by this, but what does it do to Ron DeSantis' chances going forward, even in, say, a Florida primary?
Well, I think it undermines it for sure. I mean, you know, he's one of the key leaders in the state. He's a Republican. Him and Rubio are the two senators. And then DeSantis. Governor DeSantis has also had some problems within the congressional delegation. A number of Republican members of Congress have gone and endorsed Donald Trump. That's not what you want. You want everybody on your home team. Now, you just happen to have two people from Florida, so there's going to be some division here. But Donald Trump has managed to do that, and I think with the Rick Scott thing will be sort of a sealing the deal kind of story.
And we have seen state legislative allies of DeSantis like Randy Fine also endorsing Trump. I'm so glad you're here today, and it's good to see you in person. It's Ron Klein, our exclusive WPBF 25 political analyst. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Next, we look at the future of political debates. We'll be right back.
Most accurate, most trusted. When weather turns extreme, count on Chris.
Getting you answers about traffic in one of America's fastest growing cities. Monday, we bring your concerns directly to Port St. Lucie's mayor.
Warming up for the start of the work week, what to expect as you head out the door.
We're there when news breaks in every community. Whether you're navigating Palm Beach County traffic or tracking storms on the Treasure Coast, watch WPBF 25 News Mornings everywhere, every day.
When smoking gives you COPD, you learn to lie a little bit. You make up excuses like, I have to get my keys. You guys go on. Anything so you can walk at your own pace. I used to do that all the time. Those lies don't work anymore. My tip is, the worst lies are the lies you tell yourself, like smoking isn't that dangerous.
Tobacco-Free Florida offers free nicotine replacement therapy to help start your quit journey. Call 1-877-YOU-CAN now.
Waiting for the sale of the season? The wait is finally over. It's our 78th anniversary. We're celebrating with a huge 4-day sale you just can't miss. We know you love Tommy Bahama. Now's the time to save 50% on our best-selling brand. Live in luxury with this customer favorite sofa, exclusively at Thayers for only $24.98. Celebrate 78 years of value. Where? Thayers.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Professor Kevin Wagner, a political scientist with FAU, Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, and an associate dean. Dr. Wagner, I want to look at the future of debates, considering what's going on now. They are so prevalent as far as news coverage goes, but you've got, in this case, you have Donald Trump, the former president, and the front runner in all polling for the Republican nomination, refusing to debate the undercard, if you will, here. It's 3 in a row. You have Governor Ron DeSantis last month calling for the end of these debates, having the RNC cancel them, didn't want to debate, calling them pretty much a waste of time and resources. So I want to ask you, as a political scientist, are these debates on a national stage losing some of their viability for candidates and maybe even for the public?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to give you probably the counter answer. I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. The most important being that there are very few moments, especially because of the way that the news is sort of covered today, for candidates to have breakout moments, to have a moment when somebody is paying attention to them, especially if they're not particularly well funded or they have insufficient funds to sort of do national style campaigns. Debates are one of those few moments where they can actually get the national attention and make a mark. Probably, ironically, the most important debates are the early debates, not the late debates after everyone sort of knows the candidates and has their mind made up. But those early debates when people are making their mind up, they're being introduced to candidates. Those give them a real chance to sort of, be seen and to convince people, hey, this might be somebody worthy of our attention.
And then you either break out or you don't when you get that chance on a national stage. What's at play here? I think everybody understands that Donald Trump, with such a large lead in polling, doesn't want to debate at this point. But what's at play with other candidates who may not want to be in a debate at this stage? For instance, Governor DeSantis.
Yes, so the conventional wisdom, what we know from history, is that if you've established a pretty strong campaign and you're one of the front runners, or you perceive yourself as one of the front runners, debates are worrisome because they're an opportunity for you to lose some of that momentum you have, to lose some of the support you have, or for voters that have already decided to vote for you to maybe decide, maybe I don't like them as much as I thought I did. So you're really giving a chance to fail. That's why incumbent presidents, for example, Joe Biden, is not interested in debating, because incumbent presidents have almost everything to lose and nothing to gain. In a lot of ways, Donald Trump is essentially kind of like an incumbent. He's already sort of established him. People know who he is. And so there isn't a lot for him to gain. And for Governor DeSantis, who has been sort of in that number 2 spot, and Donald Trump's not there for him to gain on, he probably feels as if there's not a whole lot for him to gain in that environment either.
Let's look at farther down on the roster here. Chris Christie comes to mind, the former New Jersey governor. He is in the race, really, to confront Donald Trump and his policies. Does he stay in or try to stay in no matter what he does on a debate stage or what the polls show in the 2 months leading up to the Iowa caucuses?
Yeah, I suspect he would probably take issue with how you've characterized his campaign, but it's certainly understandable. He's certainly been sort of the person on the stage that has often been the most willing to take on the former president's policies. But I suspect that he would probably tell you there's a lane inside the Republican Party for a candidate that's going to be a bit different than the former president, that can appeal to conservatives in a different kind of way than somebody that's in the same lane as Donald Trump. Like some of the other candidates are. So he would probably tell you, if I can get into that 2nd or 3rd spot, I can get some notice, maybe do really well in New Hampshire, there's a strategy for where I can win this. Now, I will grant you, it does look like a long shot strategy, but candidates can convince themselves of a lot of things.
I think Chris Christie would agree with you that it's a long shot for him. Last question I really have for you has to do with the debates going forward. Again, as of now, we don't have another debate scheduled. When might we see another debate, and will it be before the Iowa caucuses, if you were to guess?
Yeah, so the problem really ultimately is that the ones that want to debate the most are the candidates that are the farthest out, and they're of course the ones that are having difficulty raising money, getting attention. So the candidates that are in the lead are probably not going to want to debate. So I think you're going to have to find a dynamic where some of the leading candidates think there's an advantage to debating, and I don't see where that's going to happen anytime soon. It's possible, but it's probably not going to happen unless the former president feels like he wants to get down there and debate. That I'm sure everybody will want to be on that stage. But unless that happens, I suspect we'll probably see quite a few less debates than in previous cycles.
All right, Professor Kevin Wagner of Florida Atlantic University. Thanks for going on the record with us.
Anytime.
We'll be right back.
South Florida is watching WPBF 25.
Morning, Mr. James.
For once in my life, I have health care that protects me.
Something I've needed so long. For once, with no doubt, simply makes my life easy. Now I can live my life strong. As long as I know I'm with Simply, I will shine on. For once in my life, I have a health plan that cares for me.
Simply Healthcare is the plan you can count on to live the best years of your life. We offer benefits like $175 for allowance for groceries, home and pet care supplies, and utilities. $125 monthly spending allowance for over-the-counter health items. Unlimited transportation to plan-approved locations, and more.
Health plan that cares for me.
Mr. James, looking good.
The choice is simple. It's simply all about you. Call us today.
Thank you for making us part of your morning today. I'll be reporting live from Miami Wednesday for Republican primary debate number 3. Again, that's this Wednesday, November 8th. Our coverage begins at 4 p.m. on WPBF 25 News, and we hope you'll join us for that. And as always, we encourage you to be part of our discussion each and every Sunday as we go on the record right here at 10 a.m. Until then, you can watch all our episodes, including this one, on our website, WPBF.com, and on our free WPBF 25 News app. Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien is next. Our entire On the Record team hopes you have a wonderful Sunday. We'll see you again next week.